Hey guys, alright, today we are back with some extra credits, this time Genghis Khan, the final conquering years, extra history number 6, finally finishing the series after a really long time. I think this took me longer than finishing Catherine the Great. Today we're just gonna hear about the rest of Genghis Khan's final years. Let's see what he does, such as conquering lots of people and killing a lot more.
Well into his middle age, and with a mighty empire under his control, Genghis Khan's thoughts linger on what will happen to that empire after he dies. What will become of his family? What will become of the world he has worked so hard to shape?
Honestly, what's even more amazing though about Genghis Khan and his empire that he forged is because of those tribal roots that the Mongolians had, his empire still managed to last a couple or a few generations until it really started breaking apart and crumbling and no longer becoming a dominant force on the world. And his descendants would rule China for a good while. So, you know, it's honestly impressive. It's really amazing.
The 13th century. The Muslim lands of the Khwarezm Empire were the richest and most sophisticated in the world. Its citizens soared above their contemporaries in Europe, India, and China in astronomy, mathematics, agronomy, and many other fields. But because they stood higher, they had the furthest to fall. 100,000 Mongol horsemen stormed the Khwarezm cities. The Sultan of Khwarezm had 4 times as many soldiers, but the Mongol forces were terrifying.
And they were highly mobile, which definitely, like, highly mobile forces are very, very useful in warfare, especially at this time. And you can see this mirrored in, now it was a couple centuries ago from this time, like 400 years before this time. But when the Vikings invaded England, they were a highly mobile force and they were able to dominate the island. But then once the English adapted and started bringing in their own mobile forces, like Alfred started his changes. I'm trying to explain it in a simple way that won't take me several minutes. He was able to counter them. Mobile forces were everything in this time. You could decimate an area with a mobile force, a small mobile force, before a large enemy force could come and kill you. That's what happened in England. The Vikings were able to get away with so much and take so much loot, raise and pillage areas, and then leave without anyone hurting them because the English were not mobilized. Were not mobile like the Vikings were. And that's what I'm assuming is happening here.
And they honored their promise of clemency to all who surrendered as strictly as they honored their promise of destruction to all who resisted. Cities fell one after another. Many surrendered without a fight. Others held out for a few days or weeks before falling. After defeating each city, Genghis Khan sent clerks to divide the civilian population by profession, including doctors, astronomers, judges, engineers, teachers, artisans, and religious leaders. They especially sought out people who spoke multiple languages. Despite all of their growth, wealth, and power, the Mongols still practiced no crafts themselves other than war, herding, and hunting. All of the skilled work done in their growing empire was done by the people they conquered. They needed teachers as much as they needed riches. But one group in particular could expect no mercy from the Mongol forces. That group being the wealthy and the powerful. Under the chivalrous rules of warfare as practiced in Europe and the Middle East during the Crusades, aristocrats were protected and kept as hostages to be ransomed. The Mongols...
Essentially, the primary reason it wasn't for chivalric reasons, it was purely because money.
...had no use for such pleasantries. To prevent future wars, they sought out and eliminated any enemy aristocrats they could find. Aristocrats offered nothing of value to the Mongols, and were the most likely to resist them successfully in the future.
Very, very true. Very true. I think this is more crucial in places like Europe, where you would see the aristocrats not being all that useful, and really just having money and influence. But I'd say in the Muslim world, there was, especially at this time, because we are past the Islamic Golden Age by the 13th century, but they are still very, they're still very wealthy. They still have like the best schools, like especially in Baghdad. Um, they're still very much ahead in technology, I would say, over Europe. So I would argue that the aristocrats of the Islamic world might have a bit more use on average than, and you're probably far more likely to find an aristocrat that is also highly intelligible and could actually provide usefulness to the Mongol Empire. But that's just my opinion.
By eliminating the aristocracy, they decapitated the social system of their enemies. As the 12
But also, yeah, there's a huge benefit in completely taking out just the aristocracy. There is a huge benefit for an invading force to do that.
1220s rolled in, Genghis Khan was in his 60s, at the height of his power, with nothing and
What a
no
Chad.
one standing in his way. But despite his overwhelming
one
success
warlord.
as a conqueror, he was really struggling as a father. Custom held that each son in a herding family inherited some of their family's herd. Genghis Khan intended to instead offer each son a piece of his empire. However, he also needed to choose one son to be the next great Khan after he died. He summoned a family Kurultai to discuss the matter. His two eldest sons, Jochi and Chagatai, were tense and terse with one another. Ogedei, his third son, arrived to the meeting slightly late and also slightly inebriated.
What a mad lad.
Genghis Khan asked his eldest son, Jochi, to speak first on the matter of succession. In doing so, he emphasized Jochi's rank as his eldest son, implying he was the likely successor. Chagatai did not agree, and interrupted before Jochi could answer. Jochi lunged at his brother, and the two men started to fistfight. Genghis Khan broke up the fight and tearfully pleaded with his sons, begging them to understand how different things were before they were born, when nobody was safe. He ordered them to respect each other, but he knew that he could not impose a choice on them that would last after his death. They would have to find a compromise. After much discussion, the family decided that neither Chagatai nor Jochi should become their father's heir, but instead agreed that the role of successor should go to their mellow, good-natured, and hard-drinking brother Ogedei.
Huh.
Genghis Khan then
Well, doesn't Chagatai still become ruler at some point?
allotted his personal lands and herds to each son and separated Jochi and Chagatai, giving them kingdoms at far opposite ends of his territory. This ordeal cast a pall over the remainder of the campaign. Genghis Khan was now keenly aware of how much work he needed to do to preserve the empire after his death. He had been so dogged in his pursuit of empire and unification that he'd neglected his family. He put much effort into trying to mend the relationship between his eldest sons.
Aw.
He assigned them jointly to a campaign, but neither brother could agree on what tactics to use. And because of their bickering, the campaign stretched on for 6 months, an
Oof.
unprecedented amount of time for a Mongol siege. Eventually, they had no choice but to burn the city to the ground and flood it,
Whoa. I feel like we skipped a few steps there. We went from, bickering, and then we just decided to burn and flood a city. Okay.
destroying it utterly and leaving nothing to loot. In 1222, the Mongol conquest reached the city of Multan in modern-day Pakistan. Genghis Khan had set his sights on northern India, the seat of silk production. Here, however, he faced a new enemy that stopped him in his tracks. As soon as the Mongols left the dry and cold mountainous regions, both warriors and horses grew sick and weak. The Mongol bows, which were so well adapted to the extreme cold and heat of the steppe, weakened in the damp air and lost their accuracy. The Mongols were forced to fall back, and sustained massive casualties as they withdrew to the more familiar climate of Afghanistan. Despite this setback, they had succeeded in their goal of conquering the Khwarezm Empire, bringing Central Asia and much of the Middle East under Mongol control.
Woo!
To celebrate, Genghis Khan called for a fete that ended up being the largest hunt in history.
Really?
His men cordoned off a massive area of territory, and tens of thousands of soldiers from different armies converged on the field from different directions. The hunt lasted for months, and was intended as more than a celebration. Genghis Khan also...
I wonder just how much that hunt affected, or maybe changed the ecosystem there of animals because it was just such a huge hunt.
Wanted to use it to mellow relations between his sons, and to end the campaign on a cooperative note. Upon returning home, the victorious Mongol army saw the fruits of their conquest. The nation had been utterly transformed. Girls who had spent their days milking goats and yaks were now wearing silk, while their new servants performed menial labor for them. Elders who had never seen metal in their lives now cut meat with Damascus steel, girded with ivory hilts. They served yak's milk from silver bowls while their musicians sang to them. But Genghis Khan was not built for this life. He didn't want to stop conquering, or maybe he couldn't stop conquering. He set out once again to campaign against the Tungut, the very first foreign nation he had conquered after his election as Great Khan. The Tungut had refused to offer troops for the Khwarezm invasion, a slight that could not stand. And establishing a base in the Tungut kingdom would offer a second chance at the Sung dynasty, a target he still coveted. And that is where Genghis Khan's story very suddenly and very mysteriously ends.
Mysteriously? Hold up. Are you suggesting something, sir? Are you suggesting he was murdered?
What happened next remains something of a mystery. Some say that while traversing the Gobi to fight the Tungut, Genghis Khan stopped to catch some wild horses and was thrown from his mount, sustaining internal injuries. Some legends say that he was assassinated by a sex worker, struck by lightning, poisoned, or killed by a magic spell cast.
I believe the magic spell.
Cast by the Tungut king. Heck, Marco Polo even reports in his book, chronicling his time in the court of Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, that the Great Khan was killed after taking an arrow to the knee.
Skyrim music intensifies.
All that we know for sure is that just before the Mongol victory over the Tungut,
Genghis Khan used to be an adventurer like you, until he took an arrow to the knee.
Genghis Khan died quietly. A procession would have set out towards Mongolia with Genghis Khan's body on a simple cart. His horsehair spirit banner would have led the way, and behind the procession would have followed his horse, with a loose bridle and an empty saddle. He was buried anonymously in the soil of his homeland, without a monument to mark his grave. Genghis Khan transformed Mongol warfare from a messy tribal raiding system into an intercontinental affair fought on multiple fronts across thousands of miles. His battlefield techniques made the heavily armored knights of medieval Europe obsolete, replacing them with disciplined cavalry moving in organized units.
Well, I wouldn't say obsolete. I would just say it was not warfare that the knights were used to. But it was essentially, once the medieval knight on horseback caught up to a Mongol cavalry unit, the Mongols were screwed. The European medieval knights on horseback were vastly superior.
Units. He made brilliant use of speed and surprise on the battlefield, and perfected siege warfare to such a degree that he ended the era of walled cities. He taught his people to fight not only across incredible distances, but to sustain their campaigns over years, decades, and eventually over 3 generations of constant fighting. His last ruling descendant remained in power in Uzbekistan until he was deposed by the rising tide of the Soviet Revolution.
Really? Really? Wow, that's amazing.
In 1920. Genghis Khan was also brutal. His goals were achieved through the deaths of millions. The Mongols made no technological breakthroughs, founded no new religions, wrote no great books or dramas, and offered the world no new crafts or methods of agriculture. They simply conquered and assimilated, and their tactics left parts of the world depopulated to this day. But the Mongols absolutely did change the world, and that was what young Temujin had desperately wanted, from the very moment he first learned how harsh, violent, and unforgiving life could be. He eradicated torture, kidnapping, and raiding from his world, but at the cost of countless lives and entire...
And he would go on and do that to other people, though. I feel like you're kind of not mentioning that part extra history.
Cultures. Is peace bought with blood and maintained with force true?
Yeah, he got rid of it in Mongolia, but you know, he instead put it upon other peoples. It's just not affecting inner Mongolian politics anymore.
Peace It may be impossible to say whether Genghis Khan left the world better than he found it, but it was still undeniably changed.
Okay, that was Genghis Khan, the final conquering years, extra history part 6. We finally got this series done, and we'll be moving on to another extra history series. I hope you guys enjoyed. I certainly did. I thought they did a pretty good job. So yeah, remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.